Hi folks! Recently, I've been working on a new ability that you can use in the game. This ability allows you to grow and revitalise plants within the ability's range. I've been working on the visual side of using this ability, so let's take a look at how I reached this point. To create the growth ability, I first wanted to show what it would look like when you're using the ability. My idea was to create something like this: a sphere surrounding you, showing the range of influence that the ability would have, a series of plant-related particles, such as leaves and petals, that are populated within the sphere and trail behind you as you move, and a trail that would fade over time, left on any surface that makes contact with the sphere, if the ability can influence it. The first area I tackled was the sphere of influence. I took a basic Unity sphere and created a shader graph, combining a Fresnel effect with some depth interception to show a thicker band of colour around the outside and along any points of intersection. This sphere is an integral visual component of using this ability, as it represents the range around you that the ability can influence. Next, I tackled the particle system. I started with some generic particles being released inside the area of the sphere, then moved on to adding in the sprites for the petals and leaves. When using multiple sprites for particles, I've previously used a particle system with a texture sheet animator looping through the particles. However, I wanted to see if I could do the same thing using VFX Graph instead. Fortunately, the Flipbook UV mode for output did just the trick, and I was able to loop through my sprite sheet to release a different particle each time. As a final touch, I added a burst of particles when you activate the ability, just as an extra bit of visual feedback. The last part to implement was the trail left behind you while using the ability. The purpose of the trail is to show what your ability has influenced, like a wall of withered vines that has been revitalised by your touch. I spent more time on this part than on the other two, purely because I couldn't get it working as I wanted it to. I'd initially planned on using a trail renderer to render the trail, but I had to abandon it for two reasons. The first is that there's a bug in Unity that affects trails set to transform Z alignment, where the head of the trail faces the wrong way. Rather than a nice round front to the trail, it's a straight line across, which wouldn't have worked with the spherical confines of the ability. The second problem is that while it may have worked on the ground, it wouldn't have left a trail on other surfaces. I'd have needed multiple trail renderers to handle drawing on different surfaces, like walls or more complicated structures. I looked online to find some kind of resource on how to create a shader which would show a disappearing trail behind you, but I couldn't find anything. I did manage to find some tutorials on creating spherical mask shaders, which worked great for masking the area within the ability sphere. I simply replaced the main texture of the surface material with a different one within the confines of the mask. The area to mask is dependent on the position in the centre of the ability sphere, so I figured I could store an array of positions for a given period of time, and then I could create a trail behind me by extending the shader to handle this. I also added an additional parameter when storing these positions for their time since creation, so that the trail would get thinner when you moved away from these points. When not using the ability, I stored positions with infinite values instead of the centre of the sphere. This was to ensure that if you stop using the ability, you'd still see the trail that you'd left behind, rather than it disappearing immediately. For longer trails, it's as simple as increasing the number of seconds that I want to store positions for. Trails will stick around for longer and take longer to shrink. By combining all three elements together, I've ended up with this really cool visual effect. I can tweak the radius of the ability, which then expands the sphere of influence, as well as the bounds of the particle effect and the width of the trail that gets drawn. I plan on making this ability upgradable, so not only will you be able to increase the range, you'll be able to use the ability for a longer period and leave a longer trail behind you. This will be useful for keeping plants rejuvenated for longer and at a greater distance from you. In future videos, I will show how you can use this ability to your advantage, so stay tuned for that. I'd love to hear what you think about this ability. Let me know in the comments. That's it for this week. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.